Hello and welcome. In a previous video we have looked at the former BEA Routemasters which became the RMA class. We have also looked at the Northern General Routemasters which became the RMF class, eventually. So in this episode of looking at the class of vehicles operated by London Transport, we will be looking at the RMCs and the RCL coaches. Now I guess it's fair to say that the origins of the RMCs and the RCL coach Routemasters goes all the way back to June 1957. This was when the fourth prototype Routemaster appeared, and this was different from the other three before it in being green. Externally it was finished as a Greenline coach and was numbered CRL4. Now the CRL stood for Coach Routemaster Leyland. A bit like the third prototype, this was powered by a 9.8 litre 0600 Leyland engine. However, this one varied slightly by having an RV35 gearbox, which was a semi-automatic gearbox. As built, CRL4 contained 57 seats. There was 32 upstairs and 25 downstairs, this being less than the other prototypes. Now, the thing that makes CRL4 stand out more than anything else was that it was bodied by Eastern Coachworks. Now, there will be the majority of you who will know that, but there'll still be some people that will think, hold on a minute, ECW bodied a Routemaster? And indeed, I must admit, I thought that when I first found that out many years ago, and I suspect that we all thought the same thing when we found out that it had been bodied by ECW. CRL4 would eventually be completely rebuilt to resemble a more standard RMC and would be renumbered RMC4 in 1961. Later that same year, London Transport would order 68 Routemaster coaches for its Greenline services. Now originally these were to be classified CRs, Coach Routemaster, but they were delivered as type RMC, Routemaster Coach. These impressive coaches incorporated many of the features of CRL4, but they were of course bodied by Park Royal rather than Eastern Coachworks, which to be honest is a little bit of a shame, isn't it? How would you have felt about a large batch of ECW bodied Routemasters? What's your thoughts on an ECW Routemaster? I'm interested to read it down below. These featured seating for 57 passengers with 32 upstairs and 25 downstairs, the seats being more padded and comfortable. In addition to more comfortable seats, the interior was also fitted with fluorescent lighting, and this was to be the first time that fluorescent lighting would feature on a Routemaster. They also featured interior overhead luggage racks as well. The rear platform was fitted with doors, and of course this required them to put an emergency exit in the rear panel, altering the rear profile of the coach considerably from the standard Routemaster. At the front they were fitted with double headlights, which again made them stand out from the standard Routemaster buses, and they were fitted with slightly different destination equipment. Mechanically they differed from the standard Routemaster by having a lower axle ratio, and of course this would give them a higher maximum speed. Their AEC D182 gearboxes were also semi-automatic, and they featured Firestone air suspension on the rear axle. And they featured a total capacity of 41 gallons of fuel in their tanks, which is just over 155 litres in new money. The first of these Routemaster coaches would enter service in the summer of 1962, and these were numbered RMC 1453 to RMC 1520, and were given the registration numbers of 453 CLT to 520 CLT. Externally they were painted in the very smart dark green Greenline colours and featured a moulded Greenline roundel on the upper deck side panels between bays 2 and 3. They also featured light green relief trim around the windows. The first 20 RMCs entered service on the 715 and the 715A service, which ran between Guildford, Hertford and Marble Arch. This would see 12 at Hertford Garage and 8 at Guildford Garage. These entering service on the 29th of August 1962. Epping and Windsor were the next garages to receive RMCs, and before too long they had started to spread across the whole of the Greenline network. Now, a little time before this, in 1961, the first long Routemaster was built. And it could be argued that London Transport had been slow to take full advantage of the revised regulations which had in 1956 legalised the operation of 30-foot long two-axle double-decker buses. The standard Routemasters could seat 64 seats, but these extended Routemasters would seat 72. Originally destined to be coded ERs, extended Routemasters, the first 6 were delivered with that coding and were all later reclassified RMLs, Routemaster lengthened. And of course these were to become the famous and long-lived RML class. So in 1965, when London Transport came back for another batch of Greenline coaches, the basis was to be on this extended Routemaster design, the RML design. These were destined to become the RCL class, Routemaster coach lengthened. Now, aside from the obvious difference in length, there were also another number of differences from the 1962 coaches. Namely, they had slightly different front destination screens, and they featured simplified fleet names. These seated 65, with 36 upstairs and 29 downstairs. Again, like the RMCs, these coaches featured platform doors, which meant that they were also fitted with the rear emergency exit. Because of this, they weren't fitted with the lower deck emergency windows used on the RML class buses. These buses were fitted with AEC's 11.3 litre AV690 engine, which was rated at 150 brake horsepower at 1,800 RPM. They featured the same ratio rear axles and the air suspension on the rear axle as the RMC coaches. They were numbered RCL 2218 to RCL 2260 and were registered CUV 218C to CUV 260C. The RMC coaches were coded 6RM6 by London Transport, whereas the RCL coaches were coded 8RM10 by London Transport. Now, the Routemasters being bigger buses on the Greenline routes affected the economies on certain Greenline services. They enabled London Transport to reduce frequencies on some Greenline routes from half-hourly to hourly, but retaining the same capacity overall on the service. Now, there's a theory that the RCL coaches were actually obsolete before they were built. They were originally conceived to run on the routes in from Essex. Now, these Greenline routes were run in competition with British Railways Eastern Region, as well as London Transport's own district line. For many years, the Eastern Region had operated steam-hauled former Gresley stock, which dated back to the times of the London North Eastern Railway. In addition to being painfully slow, they also suffered from being incredibly cramped and congested at peak times. Although the reality of the matter is, I suspect that most of us would probably quite happily travel on a Gresley coach rather than some of the ironing board seats that's on the modern stock that serves the line today. The result of this was that the Greenline services in that area were always quite well patronised and had traditionally been double-decker vehicles operating on it. But by the time of the introduction of the RCL coaches, this antique Gresley steam-hauled stock had been replaced by rather swish electric trains. Now, these swish new trains were also a lot faster than the steam-hauled trains, and the commuters were starting to return to the railway instead of Greenline. Despite this, the first RCLs were still allocated to the east end of the Greenline network, with 29 going to Romford in May 1965. And these would be for the routes 721, 722 and the 726. Grays and Hertford were the next garage to receive the RCLs. The ones at Hertford being swapped for some RMCs when it was discovered that the RCLs were a little bit tight on the route they were intended for. Unfortunately, the new Eastern Region electric trains were still proving popular, and the loadings couldn't justify the larger buses. This would see the RCLs shifted around to Hertford, Windsor and Tunbridge Wells. On the 1st of January 1970, London Country Bus Services commenced operation and took over the green area of London Transport. And at this point, the green Routemaster fleet was relatively intact. The National Bus Company had taken control of the 69 Routemaster coaches and the 43 RCL lengthened Routemaster coaches, as well as 97 standard RML bus-type Routemasters. Initially, for the Greenline fleet, there was very little change under the ownership of the National Bus Company. However, by now, the RMCs and the RCLs weren't exactly giving the modern image that London Country wanted. Plus, of course, these were crew-operated vehicles, and the future, as we all know, was one-man operated buses. In early 1972, 90 new 36-foot long 45-seat AC Reliance coaches appeared, and these were to become the RP class. These displaced the Routemasters from all bar one of the Greenline services, and the RMCs and the RCLs received the bus livery of green with the canary yellow band between their decks. That one remaining Greenline route that kept the Routemasters was the 709 service from Godstone to London, which operated 3 RCLs. However, these were to be replaced by Leyland Nationals in May 1976. And this would bring the end of operation of double-deck coaches in the Greenline fleet until the arrival of 5 Leyland Olympians in 1984. In 1972, the National Bus Company introduced its new corporate liveries, and National Bus Company Leaf Green became the chosen livery of London Country Bus Services, with the RMCs and the RCLs gaining these colours. Now, I don't know about you, and I'm suspecting I might lose lots of subscribers if I say this, but please bear with me. I actually like Routemasters in National Bus Company Leaf Green. I think there's something different about them. It looks fresh, it looks different, doesn't it? It looks so nice. It makes such a change from seeing red Routemasters. Please don't unsubscribe and block me, it's just an opinion. Now, in the 1970s, London Country had a lot of problems with vehicle reliability, and I have done a video on this previously, and I'll try and remember to put a little link to this video up in the top right hand corner, as it was a very interesting time with lots of vehicles on loan to cover services. However, the company was also buying vast numbers of Leyland Nationals and Leyland Atlanteans, which in turn eventually would replace the older single and double deckers, including the Routemasters. Now, London Country Bus Services was losing quite a lot of money at one point, and the conversion of all the services to one-man operation was seen as high importance. However, it was seen quite the opposite with former owner of London Country Bus Services, London Transport. LT had been going through a little bit of a crisis. It had bought lots of AC Merlins and AC Swifts and discovered that they weren't really what it wanted. Then it went on to buy lots of Daimler Fleet Lines and found out that they weren't also what they wanted. However, they did need buses to replace the ailing RT class buses. Now, when I say ailing, the RTs were still fairly reliable buses, but they were getting life expired. The RTs dated back to the late 40s and early 50s, and it can be said it's only due to the highly efficient maintenance system that London Transport employed at Aldenham that they kept going for so long. But newer vehicles would be welcome, even if those newer vehicles were Routemasters. In 1977, London Transport announced that it was negotiating with the National Bus Company to purchase some of the former London Country Bus Services Routemasters. By 1980, London Transport had bought all of the RCL coaches and all of the RMCs except for the prototype RMC4, which was to remain with London Country. Most of the RMCs were put into use as driver training buses, and this represented a good vehicle to train drivers up on because it was still a current type of bus in the London Transport fleet. Many of these were operated by London Transport in National Bus Company Green, but with LT roundels, which looked a little bit strange, whilst others were repainted red. One bus, RMC 1518, became the training bus allocated to the Chiswick skid pan and had its air suspension replaced by coiled springs. None of the RMCs were used by London Transport in passenger service, and the withdrawals of the class started in 1981 with the sale of 11 vehicles. The RCLs were bought with the intention of those also being used as driver training buses, although not all of them were so used, and they had a variety of interesting roles. One was rebuilt as a mobile cinema and exhibition bus. 40 were put into service starting in August 1980, and the remaining 2 were scrapped. Interestingly, the buses that were put into service retained their 65 coach seats, but they had the platform doors and the internal luggage racks removed. However, despite having the doors removed, they still retained the doorway and the full-width rear end panel, complete with the emergency door. Apart from one bus, of course, which was rebuilt following accident damage and gained a standard RM rear end with a cutaway rear platform. These London Transport RCLs retained their original destination boxes and had no route number display under the front canopy. They were converted from twin headlights to single headlights, so they resembled standard Routemasters from the front. However, despite all this, they retained their rear air suspension and the high ratio rear axles, although these were swapped around and replaced by standard bus units when they failed. The RMCs continued in the London Transport training fleet until 1987, which by then it was London Buses. 1987 would also be the year that RMC 1515 would be converted to open top and return to full PSV service. However, a new highlight would appear on the career of the RMCs, and this would be in March 1989. When East London would refurbish 7 of the RMCs for use on the X15 Beckton Express. RMC 1453 would return to PSV service with Leaside buses in 1994, and this was used for special duties and would eventually pass into the ownership of Arriva. Another well-known RMC of note was RMC 1461, which was painted into the original Greenline livery by Stagecoach whilst it was still operating on the X15. In 2003, Stagecoach donated this bus to the London Bus Preservation Trust. See, they're not all bad, are they? Meanwhile, the RCL class continued in service with London Transport until 1984, where they were placed into store, and this would result in some of them being sold. In 1986, 11 of the stored RCLs were revamped and revitalised for use on the London sightseeing tour, and this would see the platform doors eventually being refitted along with tape commentary in 1990. That same year would see 10 of those 11 RCL buses converted to convertible open-top buses, with the centre section of the roof being able to be lifted out and removed. In 1992, London coaches were privatised, and these remaining RCLs found their way into the newly privatised company. This company later passed to Arriva, and in 2000 the RCLs were withdrawn and sold, with many finding use with subsequent owners, including Mac Tours of Edinburgh and non-PSV operators, where they were used as advertising vehicles and exhibition units. Today there are some very nicely restored examples of both the RMC and the RCL coaches still around in various guises, and if you see one at a rally, and if possible, I'd recommend going for a ride on one, because they're absolutely gorgeous buses. They really are. And would you believe it, with the newest buses being 60 years old this year, there are actually some RMCs and RCLs which are still licensed to legally carry passengers for hire and reward. Companies such as Ensign do a fantastic job keeping these vehicles on the road, and not only is it testament to them, but it's also a testament to the original design. So if you did want a special bus for a special day, you could still use an RMC or an RCL. Well, there we go. We've reached the end of this look at this class of London Transport buses. I do hope you enjoyed this video. However, please remember that this is just a potted look at the history of a bus that's been around for a long time, and I might have missed things out or omitted things mainly due to time constraints. But if I've left something out that's important to you, please comment down below. If you did like this video, please like and share it, as it helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss my future releases in this and my other series here on YouTube. All money raised by YouTube goes to the upkeep and continued restoration of the Southern Counties Omnibus Collection vehicles. So by watching this video on old buses, you are helping old buses in their retirement. Isn't that fantastic? And you know what? That makes you an absolutely amazing human being. It really does. Look in the mirror and say, I am an amazing human being, because Jake told me I am. Once again, thanks ever so much for watching. Bye for now.